Shubha Navabarsha and Happy Ambedkar Jayanti. The 14th of April is celebrated as Bengali New Year, but it is also the birthday of B.R. Ambedkar. Referred to as the darling of the dispossessed by Indian historian Ramchandra Guha, B.R. Ambedkar requires no introduction, and he provokes two dominant images. One that of an important and possibly the most prominent Dalit leader, and the other that of a constitutionalist who was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution, sometimes alluded as the father of the Indian Constitution. But between these two prominent images, Ambedkar was also an economist, a philosopher, a social reformer, a development thinker, and a prolific author. On occasion of his 129th birthday, this is a brief introduction to the life and the ideas of the man B.R. Ambedkar. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, lovingly known as Baba Sahib, was born on 14th of April 1891 in a Dalit Mahar caste family in modern-day Maharashtra. Even though his father was in the British Imperial Army, which accepted the Mahars as soldiers, socially they were treated as untouchables and subjected to discrimination. His experiences are depicted in his book, Waiting for a Visa. And it shows that since childhood, Ambedkar was made to feel unwanted, repulsive, polluted by the caste practices which left an indelible mark. Quoting from Ambedkar, he writes, "I knew that I was an untouchable and that untouchables were subjected to certain indignities and discriminations. For instance, I knew that in the school I could not sit in the midst of my classmates according to my rank, but that I was to sit in a corner by myself. I knew that in the school I was to have a separate piece of gunny cloth for me to squat on in the classroom. While in the school, I knew that students of the touchable classes, when they felt thirsty, could go out to the water tap, open it, and quench their thirst. But my position was separate. I could not touch the tap, and unless it was opened by a touchable person, it was not possible for me to quench my thirst." He further adds, "In my case, the permission of the teacher was not enough. The presence of the school peon was necessary, for he was the only person whom the class teacher could ask for such a purpose. If the peon was not available, I had to go without water. The situation can be summed up in the statement, no peon, no water." Such crippling social discrimination could not, however, obstruct his academic and professional progress. Ambedkar was a brilliant student. The first person from the Mahar caste to study at the University of Bombay. Then he went on to United States to study at Columbia University on a scholarship, eventually earning doctorates in economics from Columbia University, USA, and London School of Economics. On his return to India, he joined the princely state of Baroda as per the conditions of his scholarship. He writes in his autobiography, "My 5 years of staying in Europe and America had completely wiped off my mind any consciousness that I was an untouchable, and that an untouchable, wherever he went in India, was a problem to himself and to others. But when I came out of the station, my mind was considerably disturbed by a question, where to go? Who will take me? I felt deeply agitated." After a brief stint in Baroda, he moved to Bombay in his quest for livelihood. He worked as a private tutor, as an accountant, even established an investment consulting business, which failed when his clients found out that he was an untouchable. In 1918, he was appointed as a professor of political economy in the Sydenham College of Commerce and Economics in Mumbai. It was during the 1920s that his political activism came to the forefront. When invited to testify before the Sadbro Committee preparing the Government of India Act 1990, Ambedkar made an impassioned plea for creating separate electorates for the untouchable and the minority religious communities. Separate electorate remained a central claim of the Dalit movement till the Pune Pact of 1932, when Ambedkar relented to Gandhi and agreed to a policy of reserved constituencies for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes within a single electorate. By the mid 1920s, Ambedkar launched his movements against untouchability and started a weekly magazine, Mook Nayak, meaning the leader of the silent. Two major demands of the movement were temple entry and access to public drinking water for the untouchables. Leading from the front, he directed the satyagraha at Mahad for the right to draw water from the main water tank on 28th March 1927. By 1927, Ambedkar had adopted a radical stance, publicly condemning the religious text Manusmriti for justifying caste discrimination and untouchability. On 25th December 1927, he led thousands of followers to ceremonially burn copies of the Manusmriti. In 1936, he wrote possibly the most influential pamphlet, Annihilation of Caste, which is a searing critique of caste strategy. He founded the Independent Labour Party, later renamed as Scheduled Caste Federation. The contemporary Republican Party of India draws on the organization and legacy of the Scheduled Caste Federation. The radical Ambedkar was, however, quick to adopt a more constitutional path when he was appointed as the chairman of the Constitution Drafting Committee and the nation's first law minister after independence in 1947. As a jurist and a constitutional expert, he pursued his political ideas of social reform with equal vigor, leaving a deep imprint on Indian polity. In 1951, he resigned from government over differences with conservative members of the Congress party, particularly on the Hindu Code Bill. By this time, Ambedkar devoted his attention to Buddhism, participating in the various World Fellowship of Buddhists. In 1955, he founded the Bharatiya Bauddha Mahasabha and started the Dalit Buddhist movement. In a formal public ceremony in Nagpur on 14th October 1956, he and his followers accepted Buddhism. Ambedkar passed away on 6 December 1956 from ailments. A Buddhist cremation was organized in Bombay, attended by 500,000 people. Ambedkar's legacy as a jurist, a socio-political reformer, a politician, has left an intractable mark on modern Indian state, society and politics. His ideas are respected across political spectrum, and his constitutional interventions continue to shape socio-economic policies, education policy and reservation. The politics of championing the cause of Dalits continue to inspire millions of people across the political spectrum, and his appropriation has become an important aspect for winning elections. However, as Arundhati Rai rightly points out, history has been unkind to Ambedkar. First, it contained him, and then it glorified him. It has made him India's leader of the untouchable, the king of the ghetto. It has hidden away his writings. It has stripped away the radical intellect and the searing insolence. I intend to reflect precisely on the ideas of Ambedkar through a reading of his role in the making of the Indian Constitution. It is in the Indian Constitution that one can find the realization, even if partial, of the ideals that Ambedkar held dear. Ambedkar had immense faith in democratic politics and an optimistic view of constitutional democracy. He considered it better than all forms of government as it had the potential to counter exploitation and oppression. On November 19, 1948, he said in the Constituent Assembly, "The reason why we have established in this constitution a political democracy is because we do not install by any other means whatsoever a perpetual dictatorship of any particular body of people." His strong faith in democracy is adequately reflected in his adherence to the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, values that underpin all modern democracies. These principles were incorporated into the preamble. He also influenced the fundamental principles of Indian Constitution, particularly equality and freedom of religion. The Constitution guarantees a wide range of civil liberties for individual citizens in Part 3, or the fundamental rights. Importantly, all these fundamental rights were made justiciable. The right to move the Supreme Court for enforcement of fundamental right under Article 32 was considered the heart and the soul of the Constitution by Ambedkar. Even though Ambedkar was a strong advocate of parliamentary democracy, his keen mind was not oblivious to its weaknesses. He realized that democracy in practice is dependent on social structures and always runs the risk of being majoritarian without adequate constitutional morality. In 1945, he declared majority rule is untenable in theory and unjustifiable in practice. It is worth noting that initially Ambedkar's ideas for setting up Indian Federation was significantly different. His model was based after the United States of America was to be a federation with division of powers, giving states much higher degree of independence, and executive was to be elected by the entire legislature for a fixed term in office. Ambedkar eventually supported the parliamentary form of government and became a strong advocate of the federal structure based on a strong center and an independent state. Probably the partition of India and the social unrest convinced him of the necessity of a strong state. India adopted single citizenship, single judicial system, preponderance of the union legislature, and restricted autonomy of the state under various articles of the constitution. Ambedkar observed, though the country and the people may be divided into different states for the convenience of administration, the country is one integral, while its people diving in a single imperialism deriving from a single source. The acceptance of a strong, unified federal state, however, did not alleviate concerns about majoritarianism for Ambedkar. In his 1951 and 52 writings, he expressed anxiety about linguistic reorganization of states, even though he supported the idea in principle. Ambedkar demanded checks and balances to maintain social and political equilibrium and safeguards against the dominant caste. In an article in the Times of India, Ambedkar concluded that there are advantages to the demand of linguistic state, but there must be definite checks and balances to see that a community majority does not abuse its power. The greatest contribution of Ambedkar, however, is the constitutional social reform. The Indian Constitution prohibits discrimination on grounds of religion, race, sex, caste, or place of birth. Ambedkar believed quite rightly that the Indian society was stratified, opportunities were disproportionately distributed amongst groups, and inequality was legitimized through social norms. Social and political equality was crucial not only for the success of the republic, but also morally required. He was instrumental in prohibiting caste-based discrimination and legally outlawing the practice of untouchability. He argued for the reservation of jobs in public services and schools for members of the lower caste. Article 15, 16, 17 and the Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 of the Indian Constitution dealing with the upliftment of the scheduled castes and tribes stand as testament to the substantial and significant contribution of Ambedkar for the development of the Dalits. As a social reformer, he was also moved by the status of women in Indian society and deeply worried about minorities. Ambedkar supported the demands made by the minorities for proper representation as also protection against discrimination because of their weaknesses either in number or because of social standing or educational and other backwardnesses. Ambedkar also questioned the overbearing influence of religion and customs in the private lives of individuals. He said, I personally do not understand why religion should be given this vast, expansive jurisdiction so as to cover the whole life and to prevent the legislature from encroaching upon that field. We are having this liberty in order to reform our social system, which is full of inequities, discriminations, and other things which conflict with our fundamental rights. He wanted to introduce changes in the prevailing Hindu law, famously known as the Hindu Code Bill, to provide rights to property, succession, maintenance to women. In the face of opposition from conservative members, Ambedkar could not introduce uniform civil code but put it in the directive principles of state policy under Article 44. His concern for the weak and the marginalized was not only limited to caste, gender, or minorities, but also extended to economically weaker sections. As a member of Viceroy's Executive Council, he amended the Factories Act, proposing holidays for industrial workers, restricted work hours for laborers, and established 5 labor welfare boards. In Bombay legislature, Ambedkar introduced the minimum wages bill, social insurance scheme, and compulsory recognition of trade unions to enable labor to play an effective role in the economic development of the country. Ambedkar left his mark as an economist and development thinker. His doctoral thesis, titled The Problem of the Rupee, Its Origin and Solution, examined the causes for the fall in the value of the Indian rupee and highlighted the importance of price stability over exchange stability. The Reserve Bank of India, established in 1935, bore resemblances to some of his guidelines, and Ambedkar's deposition before the Hilton Young Commission, which conceptualized the RBI, has led to suggestions about his role in the formation of the same. As a minister and administrator, he established the Central Technical Power Board, the National Power Grid System, and the Central Water Irrigation and Navigation Commission. In 1951, he established the Finance Commission of India, which continues to allocate resources between states and the Union. Ambedkar's legacy as a jurist, socio-political has been remarkable for the modern India. However, his legacy is dual and sometimes confusing. As Valerian Rodrigues points out, Ambedkar drafted several documents which were to shape the constitutional developments in India. But it is irony that the practice of exclusion, continuous denial of constitutional rights and privileges, equality of opportunity and basic necessity, as well as exploitation of lower caste, continue in post-colonial India. Ambedkar was a radical, subversive leader and at the same time expressed commitment to constitutionalism. He assiduously worked to frame the Indian constitution and in the end was unhappy with the final version. As a jurist, he focused on building the institutional framework to guide and govern India, but in his speech in the Assembly on 25th November 1949, he said, "The constitution I offered may be good or bad, but it will depend on how the men in office use it," implying that rules were contingent. Partha Chatterjee shows the contradictory nature of B.R. Ambedkar in his essay titled The Politics of Govern. Ambedkar wanted separate political representation of the Dalits, preferential reservation in education and government employment, and at the same time for constructing their distinct cultural identity went so far as to conversion to another religion. Simultaneously, he also advocated an interventionist modernizing state and the legal perception of modern virtues of equal citizenship and secularism. His political ideas and intervention appear inconsistent and sometimes conflicting unless we contextualize him. As Arundhati Roy suggests, his situation forced him to be a revolutionary and to simultaneously put his foot in the door of the establishment. This is where his genius lay, in his ability to use both these aspects of himself nimbly and to great effect. Ambedkar, as the leader of the Dalits, wanted to ensure justice to the millions living on the verge of exploitation and poverty. For Ambedkar, people was not a homogeneous category endowed with innate righteousness. He knew that democracy always runs the danger of being majoritarian unless appropriate constitutional safeguards are introduced. Ambedkar was anxious, even desperate, to maneuver himself into becoming a member of the Constituent Assembly, to influence and shape the spirit of the Constitution. The provisions he introduced were to protect the cultural and educational rights of the weaker sections, minorities, and eliminate their fear from the dominance of majority. On the other hand, the provisions for fundamental rights were critical to ensuring equal citizenship and democratic fabric of the country. He knew that a mere adoption of a democratic system would not be sufficient unless equality in society, equality before law, and constitutional morality was instilled. This required a political and social project. Speaking in the Constituent Assembly on 4th November 1948, he said, "Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is not only a top dressing on an Indian soil which is essentially undemocratic." Ambedkar is a spokesman of the ignored humanity, the women, the Dalit, the minorities, the small peasants, the landless workers. He was sincere for the cause of the untouchables and in mobilizing them. He created a sense of self-respect and pride for the downtrodden. He identified political equality as inadequate for emancipation and correctly prophesied the current conjuncture of populism when he remarked on 26 January 1950, "We are going to enter into a life of contradiction. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognized by the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principles of one man, one value. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy."